Alright, hello again. This is Jeff Scott. I've been coming at you with HTML5 and CSS3, courtesy of Murox HTML5 and CSS3 third edition. We're in the middle of Chapter 4 and Section 1. I'm on page 150, talking about properties for indenting, aligning, etc. There is a text align property that you can use and set to a relative or absolute value to determine indentation for the first line of text. There's text align, where you can set your text to be left, center, or right aligned, or justify to justify it. There's vertical align, which is again a relative or absolute value that for the vertical alignment of text. And there's text decoration. And when you say text decoration none, for example, you can turn off the text decoration for your hyperlinks if you want to do that. And again, some examples, and you see the results. Okay? Alright, how to use CSS to add shadows to text. Before CSS, you had to use an image to display text with shadows, but now CSS offers the text shadow property for this purpose. Remember, when you're doing this, remember the visually impaired. Too much shadow or blur will make it even harder for them to see. Positive values offset the shadow to the right or down. Negative values shadow to the left or up. The blur radius determines how much shadow is blurred. The text shadow property is supported by all modern browsers. And if it's not, it just ignores it anyway. So, I mean, here are some examples. Just make your own decision as to whether, like, personally, I don't like the way that looks, but I do like the way that looks. And I know a lot of it is color, based on the color, but so much of this stuff, when you look at it, is just based on your own point of view. All right? All right, here's floating. Now, to float an image, you use the float property, and to set the margins around it, you use the margin property. In the next two chapters, you'll learn how to set margins and float elements, but this should give you an idea of how it works. When you float an element to the left, the block elements that follow would fill the space to the right of it. You can use the clear property to stop the element from flowing into the space alongside of it. For now, the best thing you can do is to just play with it a little bit. So notice we're floating. We're telling it to float to the left and have a margin right of 1em, and then put the other stuff in it. All right? So it takes that and converts it to that. All right? So it's the same thing, but it's if you decrease the width. Okay? The last thing that's discussed in the chapter on 156 through, well, it looks like 161, so the last 6 pages, says, now that you've learned how to code selectors and to format text, you're ready to see a page that has these skills. This page that you see right here represents a web page with 2 external style sheets. First, it uses the normalize.css style sheet that you learned about early in the chapter. Then it uses a style sheet with style specific to the page. So a sans serif font has been applied to all of the text in this document because that's the most readable font for web pages. Relative font sizes have been applied to the elements on the page. Italics and boldface have been applied to portions of the text. The copyright information, as you can see in the bottom right hand corner, it's been right aligned. All right. Colors have been added to the links. Because the first 2 lectures have passed, those first 2 links are grayed out because they're no longer relevant. So what's wrong with the typography on this page? Well, the spacing above and below the block elements and around the body of the page should be improved. In the next chapter, we'll talk about how to do that. So you can look at that and you might say, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. I don't mind anything that's in there. Because so much of this stuff that you do in web development and design is personal. But you have to always remember that whatever it is that you're working on, that you have to keep in mind your end user and keep the end user in the loop at all times to say whether or not they like or don't like what you're doing. So there's the HTML for it. All right, so the CSS then, so the HTML is on page 159. The CSS is on page 161. Now, one thing about this the author mentions here. It says, to start, notice the way that this file is structured. First, the rule sets for specific elements are presented. Then they're followed by rule sets specific to the header, main, etc. You might note that many of the rule sets that contain a single rule are done on a single line. And that's a valid way to do it, although some people don't like that. Now, one thing about this, please keep in mind, again, this is a way of doing this. I like to say, if I'm going to do something with a body, I think that should be at the top. Then I like to kind of peruse my way down the document. So as I look on here, I go, okay, so I've got a header. Is there anything I'm going to put in the header? And if there is, that probably would be my next thing to put in there. Now the author says, no, don't do that because these are more generic things. So it all depends. I mean, I've seen people who literally do this stuff in alphabetic order. All right, so you've got to do whatever you think is best for you to do. That's the bottom line. All right, so we've come to the end of another chapter. And just to kind of summarize, now you should understand the different types of selectors. Again, I don't think there's anyone that I know of at least that has memorized all of them. But in the next chapter, we're gonna kind of take it not exactly in a different direction, but learn other things. We're going to talk about something that's known as the CSS box model. Do I still have that up? Let's see. Okay. And this is a 3D picture that talks about margin, background color, background image, padding, border, and you can see how all of it fits together. All right. I kind of like this. I think it's nice for explaining that. You may or may not agree. But we'll be back with that shortly.